As humans, we feel a deep need to create meaningful connections with like-minded people, right? We have a deep desire for a sense of belonging to something bigger than just ourselves. But as a business owner, how do you create a community like this for your business? So today I'm super excited to be chatting with the amazing Chris Stowe, the one and only, on how to cultivate your community. Now, Chris, I love just before we kind of dive in, I love your bio. I love that you describe yourself as a loud introvert. I think that's such a great descriptor because I think anybody can see that and know exactly what that means. At least I do. So you're an Emmy award-winning designer and director. You're the CEO and founder of The Futur, which is he brings it out. Love it. Founder of The Futur, a beloved educational company with millions of fans all around the world. And I know many of you are joining us today. I already saw we've got people from around the world joining us. And I love that your mission, Chris, is to teach 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love, which is so powerful. So welcome, Chris, to Live with Laura.
Hi, Laura. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. We always have such great conversations every time we connect, Chris. So I'm so thankful that you joined me here today. So something that you actually shared this in LinkedIn, I think yesterday, the day before, and you shared some numbers about sort of your growth of your business, and you finished it by saying that community building isn't just important; it's vital. And I'd love to start with that. Can you share why community
Yes.
building is so important?
Yes. Well, I know you're a branding expert, and we understand that branding is this emotional connection that you have with something, and it's not really something that you can explain. It's intangible. Why someone would buy an umbrella that's $300 or $400 versus one that's $5. They pretty much do the same thing. And we're also like we have attachments to certain things, and then also people. Like people still love Apple because of what Steve Jobs meant to them. And this connection, this relationship is part of this concept that's built around community. And so when people feel like you understand them, you have their back, and you speak for them, and you see them, and they feel safe, and they feel wanted, and they feel empowered, that's the beginnings of a community.
Yeah. And I feel a lot of that starts with branding because I do that work with clients to help them. How can you create a deep, meaningful connections with the right people? And if you are trying to be something you're not, or you're people pleasing, or you're not clear on what you're doing, how can you build a community around something if you don't stand for something really strongly? Because then you're
Yeah.
just a little bit wishy-washy. So it's like the brand building really can come first because otherwise the community might not be as meaningful or as powerful.
That's right. I think a lot of us lack a sense of self-awareness. I mean, because everything that we do seems really boring and bland, and just we take it for granted. And sometimes it takes another person, someone you trust, to hold up a mirror to ourselves and say, "This is what I'm saying," and then you're kind of like, "Really? That's really cool. Okay, I accept that." So brand building to me isn't really about making things; it's just about uncovering things, showing up as yourself. And a lot of us have decent reason to not want to show up as ourselves. And so then it becomes almost impossible for someone to get to know you. And this is the dilemma. So when I learned that it's okay for me to share my opinion, and some people are going to like it, and a lot of people might not like it, and that's okay. The minute that I decided to do that, I was able to separate the audience from people who are just checking in, for people from people who really want to be a part of this thing, and say like, look, I see you, you see me, we're the same. And that's really a risky, scary thing for some people, but I think it's actually riskier to keep showing up, pretending to be someone, or not allowing people in.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a client about this the other day in a group because they're like, it's like, this is what, just because something's easy for you doesn't mean it is for everybody. So a lot of people have trouble seeing what is really kind of the core of what they do and what makes them unique and special because it comes easy to them. And they almost assume, like, well, isn't this easy for everybody else? Isn't this what everybody else does? But it takes that outward lens for somebody to tell them, no, this isn't easy for everybody else. This is what makes you unique. So we all need that outside perspective. Absolutely. So what would you, I mean, you've obviously built a huge community, right? I was looking at some of your numbers. Let me pull some of those up. 1.96 million subscribers on YouTube. Let's get them to 2 million. Throw a few my way too, 95.9. You're like right on the cusp of some of these numbers on Twitter.
Mhm.
841,000 on Instagram. So those are just a few I pulled. So like you've got some pretty massive following. So what were the key things that you did that really built those up?
There was a big mindset shift, and I'm hoping that you can learn from my lesson. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do this. But I think a lot of times people look at new forms of media as another opportunity to advertise. And we have a lot of
Mhm.
examples of what advertising looks like. And most of us at this point, when we can, we opt out of all forms of advertising. I'll give you an example. I think I subscribe to Hulu, and for like $3 more, I can watch Hulu without any ads. And so I'm glad to pay $3 more to Hulu each month so I don't have to watch the ads. And so we have to kind of think about that. So when what you do starts to sound like an ad, people turn their minds off. So basically, you're just making a lot of noise to an audience that is indifferent or might even be hostile to your messaging. Just think about that for a second. And so in the early days when we're making content, I'm guilty. We were making ads disguised as content, right? We know what it sounds
I
like,
think
and you've
we've
seen
all
this.
done that. Yeah.
We've all done something like this where it's like, ma, 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 ma. And actually, there's a course or a product or a service or something that I want you to do that's good for me and not good for you. I'm kind of stripping it down. Where the big shift happened when the audience and the community started to build was when A, we prepared, and B, we gave generously without any strings attached. I was talking to Daniel Priestley. He said there's a whole product ecosystem, and everyone who's influential has certain parts. And the first part is he describes it as a gift. And a gift is like the way it sounds. It has to be wanted, it has to be valuable, and it has to be given without strings attached. No call to action, no nothing. Just give, like what you're doing right now. You're just going to give. And when you start to do that, the more valuable the gift is, the more people will show up. So just think about what your audience wants right now that they can't get, help them to bridge from where they are to where they want to be and deliver that to them.
Yeah, I love that. That actually brings up an interesting so my husband and I were chatting this morning. Hey, Philippe, I'm sure you're watching. We were chatting this morning about this whole idea about, um, people out there think that marketing and sales is kind of secondary to the work, right? And I think the reality is we all have to be great at what we do to be in business. I think that's sort of like that's almost table stakes. If you're not, like, you're not going to succeed anyway. But ultimately, without the marketing and sales, but yet that has become almost a dirty word. It becomes this like you're fish hooking somebody, or it's kind of slimy, or everybody has now got to become a content creator. But that's not what you study. You're like, I'm really good at this thing, but now I have to figure out how to market and sell myself. And yet when you almost start from the like, what is the gift? What can I, instead of like, I need to sell this thing, how do I reverse engineer and sell that thing versus what do people need? What is the gift I can give them, knowing that that will then beautifully dovetail into what it is that you're offering them. And they're going to be like, of course I need to work with you. So what are your thoughts around the like marketing and sales and how that all ties into, is that more or less important in terms of the flow from the work itself?
Mm. I'm going to take a different approach to answer this question.
All right.
Just kind of maybe stir up a little controversy, but also because I want to voice what maybe some of your audience is going to hear, which is no, you don't need to do marketing and sales. I'm going to focus on my craft. That's the secret to success. Maybe that's what they're thinking. So let's try to understand this. So instead of spending 100 hours working on marketing, content marketing, lead generation, sales, whatever it is that we're going to put in category A, let's just keep working on our craft. And the better that we get at our craft, the more work we'll get. Let's follow that logic then. How will people find out about you? I mean, you could be the world's greatest undiscovered talent that has ever been seen in the history of the humankind, right? How are people going to find out about you? Well, you have to show it somewhere. Okay, so where will you show it? Well, maybe I'll show it in a gallery. Maybe it'll be featured in a magazine. Well, how will the editors of that magazine find out about you? So then now we're like, okay, now we're kind of stuck, aren't we? You're not going to hand out flyers because that's even like more annoying than putting out a piece of content. So what you want to do is you want to be able to take your piece of content and put it in front of people who might appreciate that. And some of them might just be potential clients for you. And you have to look at where you can do this that's most effective, that has the broadest reach, that has the potential of hitting your audience. And the answer to that question is going to be different for each person. For some people, they're really great at writing and they're great at speaking. So maybe a podcast might be the way. Or maybe you're very visually oriented or you like to tell little stories and do skits and you're good with cameras. Maybe Instagram or YouTube Shorts is a space, or TikTok. All those are viable options. And so it becomes impossible for someone to hire someone they don't know. So the first act of almost every business is the act of getting known. And you said it. The cost of entry is to do something good. Whether you make a sandwich or you make a logo, that is the cost of entry. Because if you can't do that, we don't know what
Yeah,
we're talking about here. Go back
exactly.
to school, get an apprenticeship, train under somebody, watch a few videos and do workshops, whatever you need. Baseline, you have to have skill. You have to have something that is valuable to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you that you could have, I was telling my clients, if you could have the best brand in the world, but if nobody knows about it, it will not succeed, right? Like we could create you the most spectacular messaging and visual brand, but if you hide it from the world, that that's not, it's not like you build it and they will come.
Yeah.
That's not quite how this works.
I'd
So
argue too that it's impossible to have the best brand if no one knows about it, because a brand requires a relationship with a customer. You
that's
might have
true.
the best product or service in the world.
Yeah.
You don't have the best brand.
You are absolutely right. And I think relationships are really key. And so, you talked a bit about platforms, and I think that's such an interesting thing to dive into is there are so many different platforms. People are like trying to figure out the algorithms. Now they're like, well, I have to do reels because Instagram doesn't show anybody my regular posts. So now I have to
Right.
like point and dance, or I have to create video content, or and people feel kind of pushed to create content that doesn't feel authentic. And I've heard of so many people lately who've lost access to their accounts because they've been hacked and they've lost everything. So you've got, millions of followers and you've got multiple platforms, you know, that's building community, but what happens if you lose one of those? Like, so do you have any thoughts around where people should be building their community, and is it on a social media platform?
Yeah, most likely it's going to start on a social platform, um, because social platforms make it really easy to be discovered. For all that we want to gripe about how the algorithm changes, it helps some and it hurts some. And when you're on the opposite side of it, you don't feel so great. I know there are a bunch of smaller creators, friends of mine that have less than 100,000 followers. Their accounts are growing really fast right now. And I see what Instagram is doing. And it's kind of what YouTube did many years ago. So before, what happened was it became where a phenomenon where the rich get richer. So big YouTube creators had massive audiences, and the algorithm would just show you more of their content. So it meant that there were fewer smaller creators who would feel encouraged to try, because it's like nobody's watching my content. So they kind of did a reset to say this serves the most good, or does the most good for the most number of people. And so if you're one of those big creators, you could see your numbers plummet, and a lot of them just left the platform. They became disinterested. And I think that's the same thing that's happening. I don't have it on record. I don't know anything, but it seems like there's a democratization of the platform for all kinds of creators, because more creators means more diversity of content, more inclusion and representation. And these are good things.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of stalled out at about 838,000 followers on Instagram. At first, I'm like, but I'm like, why do I deserve any more follower? I don't deserve anything. And I am here to create content to help people. So if one new follower follows me, that's okay. I'm totally good with that, especially because I see some of my friends rocket really fast, pick up 10,000 new followers in a week. That is really cool for them. I'm really happy for them. So I think that's kind of what's happening.
And what would you say is the key to people who are growing their platform that quickly?
They've identified their audience, and they're creating content that's valuable to them, and they just keep showing up. One of my friends, Annalie Hansen, her account was really slow in the beginning, and then in the last couple of weeks, she picked up tens of thousands of new followers. So she's rocketing right past 50,000 followers, and it's just happening like that. And what she's posting are fairly simple, minimalistic carousels to teach
Mm,
people about branding and marketing. That's it.
yeah. Yeah, I guess I think you said it. It's showing up. Showing up consistently with great content so people really get to see you. And you never know what that one post might be that suddenly is a thing that gets picked up and starts to really build your community.
Yeah. I almost feel like it's an aggregate of posts. The silver bullet, the miracle shot, is a fool's errand to chase. I think what you
Right.
have to do is consistently make incremental improvements in the way that you communicate to people, whatever platform you're on. And so something that we do a lot is we'll make a post, we'll ask ourselves what worked and what can be improved. And over time, even if it's a 1% improvement over each post, in a very short amount of time, you're going to be 3, 4x in terms of the quality of the post. And I think there's an art to like learning how to communicate, and it takes time to find your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. If anybody joining us has any questions for Chris, just pop them into the chat so we can, and I'll pull them up and we can ask wherever that is, wherever your chat box is. I don't know. We'll see. Um, so I think a lot of people that follow me as well are kind of solo entrepreneurs. They're small business owners. They are doing a lot of things themselves and they just find it a bit overwhelming. They're like, on top of, being great at my craft, now I have to be an expert content creator. So do you have any, and I know kind of you started off, as you said, in what was it, 2014, kind of, it was you and a partner and you released your first video and you kind of went from there. But I'm assuming you were doing kind of all of your production yourself and you didn't have a team to do that for you.
I had one advantage. I had this other production company, and one that I ran for many years. I think at that point, like almost 19 years. And so we had camera equipment, we had lights, and we had a lot of people who knew how to do all this stuff, and we had space. And so we essentially siphoned money from our service design company Blind to pay for the future, and we did this for years without seeing any return. And this is the part that people don't talk about, the struggle phase. And if we had to pay rent and for the personnel and the utilities and all that stuff, we would be deep in debt because you saw the original numbers. It wasn't very impressive. But once we figured it out, I mean, I had space, I had a stage, I had the cameras. So I would just say, Jimmy, what are you doing today? No, you're not doing that. You're actually going to help me set up this thing because we're going to go live stream. And so I borrowed the resources from Blind so that we can run the future. And that's how we're able to get our content off the ground. And you may or may not know this about me and Laura. Like I try to delegate as much as possible and only hold on to the critical things. Of course, like all entrepreneurs, I'm guilty of like, oh, let me just do this little thing because it'll be real easy. But anything that can be delegated, I try to. So when it came to shooting, lighting, editing, that's not me doing that. I'm just sitting there trying to write and produce content, and everybody else around me helps me to make that possible.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of the doing it all or trying
Yeah.
to, and I'm really working on my delegation skills. But it is a skill, I think, especially when it's your business, it feels like it's your baby and like, how could anybody possibly do this as good as me, right? I think that's often, and yet I think quite often there are other people who can do it much better than you. And identifying that early on, what you can delegate, you know, what are you really good at? What is the stuff that's generating the most revenue? What brings you the most joy? And one thing I've discovered is I love doing interviews like this. This is easy for me, right? I
Mm.
love doing my videos and other kinds of content like that. And yet it can be so easy to, things creep up, calendars get full and then you're like, "Oh, now I don't have time to do those things that are fun and ultimately lead to that visibility and lead to, even though I'm not asking anybody for anything, I can already see that creating content like this is bringing business in
Yeah.
very sort of organically because
Mhm.
people are seeing me. I was at a dinner last night and this one guy was like, You're like everywhere." I'm like, It feels like this is going really well." Like you could see it. I'm like, he's seeing me everywhere and that I'm visible. I'm like, what it's all about, as long as you've got good content that you're putting out there into the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if anybody has a question for Chris, let me know. And I want to chat with you a little bit about Twitter. So that's not a platform I'm on very much. And obviously there's a lot going on with Elon Musk taking it over, and people are like, are we staying on this platform? What are we doing? And I know you're on Twitter. What are your thoughts on kind of where that platform's going?
I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter. Gonna be super honest with you. I love it because there aren't high expectations of what considered a piece of content on Twitter. And basically, if you have a random musing, a couple of characters you write, or if you want to send up a funny GIF or a meme, that's okay too. I love it for its speed and how quickly you can iterate on ideas and get instant feedback. I think just maybe 10, 15 years ago, to get the kind of feedback you can get on Twitter, you'd have to pay a research firm to conduct surveys and to write reports, but you can get it in real time on Twitter really fast. Part of building community is having a dialogue with your audience. So oftentimes I'll ask them questions like, what do you think about this topic? Do you want this guest? And they'll say, and it's not a question for fake engagement. It's really, I'm genuinely listening in. And my best content ideas really come from, believe it or not, angry responses to my own thoughts. And I like that. I,
I
I know
love
it's not for
that.
everybody. I want to put that out there. I'll tell you my creative process right now. So when I write something, I don't always sit there and think about like, what could this mean through 100 different lenses, right? What if I don't have the use of my arms? What if I don't have one eye? What if, I'm homeless? What if I don't know all the perspectives? I just write it from my perspective. And sometimes saying what I say will trigger a pretty strong negative response. And it always catches me off guard. Like, how is it that you could see it from this point of view? But seeing it from that point of view actually helps me out a lot, because then it's like someone out there, at least one person, is struggling with this concept. And if they have a strong enough response to it, it means they deserve a better answer from me. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just totally wrong. I'll just put that out there too. But this is really exciting for me now because I'm like, oh, I thought this is really clearly communicated and I thought it was fairly obvious to everyone. And now you're coming at it with this super strong response. Okay, I'll engage with them a little bit because I want to see the extent of what they're thinking. If there's fire behind the smoke, oftentimes it's just smoke. There's nothing there. Every once in a while, you find really there's a raging inferno here. And now I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to write the response to this because I'm emotionally charged. And this is, I think, one of the coolest forms of co-creation without their consent, I suppose, because we just write back and forth. I'm like, it's super clear to me now you're my like unwitting writing partner in this, and I'm going to write something. And if I can write something on LinkedIn and that takes off, maybe there's a video in the future. So I like to test it with very low effort, minimal energy, just try ideas rapidly, see what sticks, not because I'm trying to stir up the hornet's nest, but because I'm not sure myself. Take that and keep escalating. So it starts off like an idea, like a little snowflake. By the time it reaches the bottom of the hill, it's an avalanche.
Yeah, I love that. And when I think about some of the content I've created, it's definitely been sparked by a conversation, a comment, something that somebody didn't understand, and it's like, oh, okay, that's something I could turn into. But I love how you're talking about building community through actually engaging and asking the questions. Because sometimes we sit in our little bubble and we're assuming that we know what people are struggling with or what they need the most. So why not just ask them?
It's the
It's that
easiest way.
like, there you go. It's so simple, but,
Yeah.
like, just ask. So we have a couple of questions,
Okay.
and I see one from Adriano. Could you maybe, clarify your question for us a little bit, and then I'll share it? Maria, who's, works with me, who's amazing. So she says, "Is moving or trying to send your community to Discord a good idea or a good platform to connect in our industry?"
Mm. I think Discord's a pretty cool platform. I don't use it that much, but it's kind of crazy like what you can do with it. You can do voice, video, text messaging. It's pretty cool. And it's a place where you can wall it off from other people. So a community needs to have a fence, some kind of fence, because otherwise there's no definition of the border, like who are we and
Mhm.
who's not part of this group. So you do have to create some kind of barrier. And I think Discord can be an excellent platform to use. And I know if you're in the NFT space, Discord is the platform to use.
Yeah. Are you on Discord? Do you use
I
it at all?
am. I use it periodically, but there's so much that's going on there that it can suck up all of your time. Mhm.
As with so many of the platforms, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so there's another question from Artist 93 Menel. Okay, let me just read this one. So it's more about connecting with other artists and, English and internet. So there's a lot of challenges. So
Mhm.
do you have any suggestions on how to build a community? Maybe that's not, would that be not online or some other way? What are your thoughts, Chris?
I really love the nature of that question or thought. Like, I don't have access, and English is a barrier for me. So these are real challenges I don't have to deal with, and I take for granted every single day. Like when the internet's a little choppy, I'm like, oh, I got to call my service provider. This is unacceptable. Mar, right? So some
Yeah.
people don't even have internet. Okay, so let's try to figure this thing out. Oftentimes, as I'm told, there are libraries, and libraries have free internet, and you kind of have to work around your resources. So this would be called the constraint. So the constraint says you only have internet access from 9 to 5 at specific locations. So people might get really angry about that. And that's unfair, and I understand it's unfair. And if we operate with the assumption that the world is unfair, everything will be much easier. You could say, well, from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m., I have a lot of time to think, to write, and to prepare. I'll make props. I'll really think through my ideas. And so each time you're able to create and share and upload and kind of engage with your audience, um, you know what time frame you have to work within. And that actually, those constraints can be really excellent at fostering super creative thoughts. And it might be the healthiest thing of all, because you might be tempted at 3 in the morning to check in on your feedback, but you can't because the library's not open. So almost within most cities that have some kind of infrastructure, some kind of um, government, then I would think that there must be an area where you could have limited access that's free, and just use that constraint to help you. In terms of the English part, um, we can learn another language if we want, right? Like, I'm learning a little bit of Mandarin. I took 2 years of French. I'm not conversant, but I have a couple of words. And that's this wonderful thing about the human mind. We can learn anything that we want to if we find enough value in it, if we're persistent enough to learn it. But that doesn't mean that you have to learn English, because you can still build a community in your native language. You'll just be limited to who can understand it and your reach. So as unfair as it might be, English is the international language. So if you can create content in English, because you'll reach 10x, 100x of the kind of people you might reach.
Yeah, and it's, I've been using Duolingo to learn. I was telling Chris just before we hopped on here that I'm moving to Italy with my family for 10 months starting in September. So every day we're on Duolingo, like learning Italian, and it's not always easy, but it helps, and you're incrementally getting better and better. And so if the goal is to improve your English, just find a way to like move it 1% every day, and that will help, and just start to put out content that is simple, that you can leverage that language with. Yeah, awesome. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. I think there's some great comments, and Chris, you can go back and check all of those out. So I want to ask you about building community through your email list. So obviously you've got lots of following on social platforms, but there's also other ways to build community. And I'm assuming, I mean, I get your emails, so obviously you're leveraging your social platforms to also build your email list. So how do you leverage that in terms of community building?
Um, that question is above my pay grade. I will tell you, we have a
That's one of the
massive.
things you delegate.
Yeah, I know very little. I know a few things about just a very few things, but I
Okay.
do know the last time we checked, we have a massive email list. I think it's over 150,000 verified emails, because we consistently scrub through them for unopened rates and whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I gotta tell you, Laura, I'm shocked that we have that many people on our email list, because I remember a time when we had 3 or 4 thousand on our email. I was like, this is fantastic. There are 5,000 people who said, I'd like to receive your emails. This is nuts. And it's a great, really intimate relationship. When I talked about walling off the garden a little bit, your email list is a walled off garden, because only those that elect to get our emails or who decide to opt out, that's fine. So we're speaking to somebody who's already very interested in us and wants to hear from us. We have to treat that with respect and not bomb you with so many promotional things. And so we try to like mix it up with announcements, some value, resources, and things that we think you should be aware of. And we have to treat that relationship like with the utmost care, because otherwise people will just massively unsubscribe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
It can be a slippery slope. Yeah, and Maria, who again, she said English, Spanish is her first language, but she does everything in English for work. So,
Yeah.
and I know there's been times it's like I remember when we first started working together, she would have me check her emails. Like, can you just check this to make sure like
Yeah.
obviously we don't do that anymore, but it was great that she asked for that help. So maybe if you're trying to write something in English and it's not your first language, just ask somebody who's a native English speaker to check it and give you some and that will actually help you along the way. So yeah, that's a great point, Maria. Thanks for volunteering.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys know this, but English is my second language. And I struggled with speaking English and pronouncing polysyllabic words because my native language is Vietnamese and it's a monosyllabic language. And I didn't understand why throughout junior high and high school. Like I was having a really hard time pronouncing certain things. So when it came to oral reports or anything, or some people have very complicated names and too many syllables. And I struggle just not feeling like tongue tied and tongue twisted when just saying basic words. It's something you work on.
Absolutely. And thanks for sharing that because a lot of people might not realize and to hear you share that, I think was probably very encouraging for a lot of people. So we've got another question for TJ. So we've got a couple. So we'll cover these, which I think
Okay.
are great. So how organic do you want your community demographic to grow versus targeting those who you're truly intending to connect with?
Good question, TJ. That's one that comes up all the time. If your intention to build community is to sell and to generate leads, you're probably going to want to keep this super focused. But for me, I'm not so interested in selling and creating community just to sell to them. I'm trying to build a coalition of like-minded individuals around empowering creative individuals to have business success. That is a lot of people. That kind of can fit just about anybody because we don't define a creative as you have to be a painter, an illustrator, or a graphic designer. Anybody. And it's quite wonderful now because people who enroll in our business bootcamp, they own hair salons. They're tattoo artists, and this excites me so much because like wow, I'm growing beyond that original core audience of hardcore graphic designers, and it feels so good to be able to extend our reach. I'll tell you, one of the funniest places I've been spotted was at LAX. I was going through security, and the people who are like monitoring the conveyor belt, and this African American gentleman looks at me. He's like, I know you, I watch you, thanks for doing what you do. The security guy recognize me. And like, okay, the reach is good. This is really nice. So it depends on what your focus is. If you really want to truly build community, then I think you put out valuable content aimed at a specific target and realize this is a Blair Enns expression. The market is bigger than your target. Like I
Mm,
targeted graphic designers, people who wanted to run a design business, and then slowly over time it gets bigger and bigger. And you'll see this happen with a lot of big influencers and authors, like Gary Vaynerchuk, for example. You'll see that he's speaking about increasingly broader topics like kindness, empathy. It's because once you outgrow your original audience, the only way to continue to grow is to broaden out your message.
yeah. It's very true. I love that. All right, we've got one more question. We'll take that and then we'll wrap it up. So, is that you mentioned that people won't know one's company unless they put themselves out there. What is the best platform or way for introverts or simply people who don't feel comfortable or don't necessarily have a lot of content to create?
Okay. I love this question because as a fellow introvert, I feel your pain. I live with your pain and we share these feelings. Turns out a lot of visual artists are introverts, and it's about how we manage our energy being around people, right? Like we're good around hanging out and having deep conversations with a few people. We're not great at having superficial conversations, quote unquote small talk with a lot of people. That's super uncomfortable for introverts. I am one. It's not something that you can change about who you are, but you can develop tools and systems around that and turn your introversion into a strength. And this is what I'm all about. A lot of
Mm,
times, what we say is like we focus on the negative components of our attribute. All we have to do is flip it and say, what is great about being an introvert? Well, We're great listeners. We're deep thinkers. And, we have lots of ideas to share. We just need a moment to collect our thoughts. And so the extroverts, in classroom at least, will shoot up their hand, they'll draw attention to themselves, and we don't have that opportunity. But if you're out of school now, which many of you are, you have plenty of time to sit, to think, to reflect, and to write. And it turns out there are a lot more introverted CEOs that are world famous, that are millionaires, if not billionaires, that are introverts than you would think. Tons of them. So don't be discouraged. We often think of the alpha male or female extroverted gregarious type as the ones who capture all the attention because they do. And we think that must be the model. It is not. There's plenty of room. And that's why I deliberately chose those two words to put together. My two-word brand, loud, because I understand how to use platforms to scale and communicate my IP from one to many. But really, at my core, I'm just about listening. I didn't know this was a strength until you get into sales, right? Michael Bungay-Stanier writes about this in his book, The Coaching Habit. He's like, we should learn to ask questions more, to be silent a little bit longer, and to be less inclined to give advice. This is what I do. And it turns out this is an excellent salesperson. And it
Yeah.
goes counter to everything you think about sales. I don't have to be like walking in there, chest out, banging down doors with a booming voice. I can just quietly ask a person, so what's on your mind? What's a business problem that you've not been able to solve? And just listen with super hyper focus, which is what I can do. Keep in mind, the extroverts, the ADHD people, they can't stop talking because their brains are going 1,000 miles an hour. So I believe in this. You can't learn if you're talking.
Mm.
And this is a powerful thing. So lean into your introversion, find where it's strong, and amplify those parts.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You can't learn when you're talking. It's so powerful. And honestly, I am a big extrovert, and I've had to train myself to be quiet like to not talk right now or to listen long. So it's a skill I've had to work on because my go-to would be to fill in the air, to fill in the space. And so that's such an interesting perspective. And I think that really ties back to what you said right in the very beginning. We'll wrap it up there. It's like that key of people feeling seen and heard, right? Building a community where people feel that. And you can't do that if you're only ever talking, and you have to listen. And so asking the right questions and engaging, I think that's beautiful. So I would love to ask, are there any, last sort of tips or thoughts just to leave people with around how they can cultivate their own community?
Yes, I can give you some tips, but I just want to quickly respond to something that you just said.
Okay.
You said as an extrovert, you have to make a deliberate practice to stay silent, to be focused on the person, and to really truly listen. And it's not an easy thing to do, even for introverts. It's not. So I love that you're doing these video podcast interviews because it's giving you habit, or it's helping you develop a habit so that you can focus on this. I've had people say this to me before. I never thought about this about myself, but they're like, you're an amazing interviewer. I was like, I hardly say anything on the interviews. That's the point, everybody. You have a guess. Don't take up so much space. Ask a good question. Follow up with it. Go down whatever rabbit holes you want to go down and just be about that person. And that is a skill that introverts have. Okay. I don't think I need to help extroverts because extroverts already know how to talk, how to communicate, and how to be visible and to step into the spotlight. So, this is a message to all of you quiet, introverted people, people who feel left out, left behind, and ostracized by whatever community that you're in. The world is a much bigger place than the town that you live in, the city that you dwell in, or where you were raised. Don't be limited by your geographic constraints. We're all connected together. And I think one of the most beautiful things that the internet has done for us, it's done some bad things for sure, but it's made the world shrink. Like I can understand and speak to someone who is living in Cairo or in the Philippines or some other part, Eastern Europe, which in places I've never even heard of. I had to literally look it up on a map, like, oh my God, there it is. It's right there. I didn't even know. And this is wonderful. When you want to build a community, you have to ask yourself, what is my motivation? And if the answer is not to genuinely give and to help others, then you might try to find something else. A lot of times people substitute the word customers for community. They're two totally different things. Okay.
Mm,
And when they say, I want to build a large community, what they're really saying is, I want a lot of people I can sell stuff to and to buy my stuff. And if that's your intention, work on marketing, work on advertising, work on something else. When people feel you have nothing to sell them, that you show up and you don't hold anything back and you're just trying to give, they will show up in droves to be part of what it is that you're doing. That's my
yeah.
advice.
Oh, I love it. And I think even for the extroverts, like that still lands for me even as an extrovert, and that idea of not confusing customers with community. I think that's a really, really powerful distinction. So thank you so much, Chris, for your time, for your insights, for your authenticity and your honesty. I think I always appreciate that. And you are a good interviewer, having been on your live stream twice. I always found your questions and like the times you've challenged me, or, like we've always had such deep conversations. And that really does start with the question. So we've got Renee who's joining. It sounds like they're joining the boot camp that you're starting, I think tomorrow.
Oh, yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
the boot camp, super excited to start tomorrow, so, amazing. You've got
Thank you so much, Renee.
some fans, some big fans, so
Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, I look forward to connecting another time, and we can have a part 2 and dive into
I
this
love that.
even more, but I think you've given everybody and myself. I'm gonna have to go back. I didn't wanna take notes because I didn't wanna distract myself, but
Mm.
I'm gonna go back and really take a lot of this to heart as well. So thank you from me and for everybody else watching.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're my fan, if you enjoyed this piece of content, do me a favor, give Laura a follow wherever you're listening or watching this from.
Oh, thanks. And don't forget to follow Chris. I mean, that's that's me just being a terrible host and not saying, "Chris, where can people find you?" I guess I'm just assuming that everybody knows where you are. But we'll make sure we can always pop those links in the comments. But thanks
Wonderful.
again, Chris, and
Thank you.
looking forward to the new follows myself.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Okay, bye.
Bye.